This is episode 7 now. We have guest on Simon, if you want to introduce yourself.
Right, that's it. That's an introduction. I'm not going to do much more than that.
Okay. You don't want to talk about your academic background or anything? Obviously, it's quite an interesting one.
I don't know that it is. I mean, I suppose it's more of a demographic thing, really, because, going way back to 1984, the economy was in an absolute dire situation then. I can't remember who was Prime Minister then, but I do remember Thatcher coming in. But a lot of us it was difficult to get to university then. So you got a choice, certainly in a rural area like this one, that you either sort of joined the army, went into agriculture, or went into building trade. I chose the latter. So it's a difficult thing for me to talk about, really, because I don't know how to expand on that, because certainly there weren't the opportunities for higher education, and further education, by and large, was either self-funded or funded by employers such as city and guilds, just as an example, to achieve trade qualification. Getting on the housing market, same complaint then as there is now. Shortage of houses, and they're all too expensive. So whether you agree or disagree with that, I don't know. But there's always something somewhere, and it depends really how sort of flexible you are with your working attitude. I suppose whether you're going to work away, which I had to do, and what sort of house you want. I mean, I bought derelict houses and did them up, so never had a mortgage. Why would you need one?
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about standard working practices 9 till 5, which gives you approximately, sort of 40 hours, 38 hours, 38 and a half, I believe, something like that. But if you're working 6 or 7 days a week, then you're going to just earn more money, and it depends. It's not what you've got coming in, it's what you've got going out. So I think it still is achievable. So I'm not holding with the argument that there's no property about. I'm not holding with the argument that it's unaffordable, because there's plenty of property available in, let's say, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Italy, that's cheap. Move. Don't like it, move.
Yeah, well, it's just getting access to jobs and things like that.
It is, right? But this was the problem I had, that you did get that argument then. Oh, well, what about access to jobs? I don't know. I mean, I just chucked letters off. I was on the phone all the time, work away. It's that simple. I mean, I was in a small rural village. I mean, the nearest employer was some farm in the sort of flat Lincolnshire countryside on the distant horizon, and that was it. So there was no choice but to go. As I said, you either joined the armed forces, went into agriculture, or the building trade.
You have remote work now, as a whole nother kind of work.
Remote working.
Yeah, so I'm a good example of that. I do video editing as a job, right?
Right,
so,
right.
Just for example.
Right.
So
yeah,
your point about rural communities is.
I think again, let's say remote working. I mean, to me, had I been younger, that's exactly what I probably would have been into, because it just makes sense. You don't have to physically move. It doesn't require a sort of peripatetic working lifestyle.
And you choose your hours a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And presumably your audience or your customer base, whatever you wish to look at it in sort of hard economic terms, if you're home working, let's say, and you're using technology, you've got access to whether you're talking to somebody in Canada or Brazil, it doesn't matter. And if you can earn a living from it, great.
Yeah. So I mean, the point of this episode that we were getting into is reserve currencies and stuff like that. So I suppose I don't know where to start. I've done some historical research, up till now, and then going into the future.
Okay.
So I suppose I'll start with just defining a reserve currency. The reserve currency tends to be, the way I put it is there's like 2 pillars of reserve currency.
Yeah.
People use it for commerce and international trade.
Yeah.
And people hold it in their banks.
Yes.
Predominantly.
That's
because it's a reserve currency. So you look at historically, I'd say the first proper global reserve currency was the Spanish silver dollar.
Yeah, I don't think you could pretty much argue with that. That's fair enough. Yeah.
I mean, because before that, right, you had the Roman dinar and things like that.
Yeah.
Which it wasn't global, because obviously you didn't have the Americas and you didn't have, there was cross commerce with China, but it wasn't as common.
No.
The Spanish sort of pioneered that, right? So you had silver coming out of the Americas and into Spain. Spain would gild it, and then Spain would use that gilded silver dollar to go and trade with China and Eurasia and the like. So that's the first one, and then that was succeeded by the Dutch with the Dutch guilder, and they were the first first global reserve currency with a monetary policy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So they had the full Reserve Bank of Amsterdam, and that played a huge role in, having a monetary policy, right? For the first time, you had things like currency exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have the Dutch guilder as the base, and then literally weighed on
Mm-hmm.
scales because it was in gold and silver. Weighed up against the Dutch guilder would be like the pound and the German mark and things like that. And so what you had is, this monetary system based on a currency as the reserve currency to compare other currency values and things like that, and that facilitated more commerce.
Yeah,
and that's one of the key aspects of a reserve currency, right? Is that it's like the benchmark currency.
There's nothing there I would disagree with. Let's just add to that to have a reserve currency, it has to be backed by something. We could argue with the Guilder and the Dutch that it was the Dutch East India Company, and again, sooner or later we're going to get into military influence on that. That somehow you've got to back up your commercial interests with military. Same with Spain, Spanish Empire. Dutch East India Company, British Empire, Roman Empire, the Han Dynasty, on and on we go. But it has to be backed up by something. And just to really jump way, way, way forward, and we're looking now, what's the world's number one reserve currency? Whether we agree or disagree, it's got to be the dollar.
Yeah.
Or more accurately, the petrodollar.
Yeah.
Let's just pick a stupid example.
So this is something I was getting into. The petrodollar is supposedly dead, and that's what I was getting to. I was going to go talk about how the pound died, and it was parallel.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no. We can just jump into the petrodollar.
Let's hop about a bit. I mean,
yeah. So if you want to introduce the concepts of a petrodollar for anyone who doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, just as a really, really basic example, that let's say you sort of dig around in your back garden and you suddenly strike oil, you cannot sell that in sterling or the euro or anything else. That has to be done on the global exchanges in the US dollar, which so they've got dollar hegemony. And this sort of kind of then really leads us in this business with the BRICS and all the rest of it. It's why there's so much animosity at the moment. Why China, Russia, India, Brazil, the United Arab Emirates, I believe Ethiopia now as well, incidentally. I think there's a few more joined. I can't remember, to be perfectly honest.
Argentina joined.
Argentina, okay. And they're trading in the yuan. And obviously the ruble, not so much. And,
just to interject, Russia very recently, I believe last week or maybe the week before that, they've issued for the first time bonds in the yuan. They're issuing yuan bonds or panda bonds, as they're called.
Yes.
Hungary has done this before, and the UAE has done this before.
Yeah.
But Russia doing it is shocking because they're meant to be sort of their own, closed system with the ruble and things like that. So issuing bonds in the yuan for Russia,
it's interesting. That's going to be an interesting development. And it will be interesting. I think at the end of the day, you've got two massive power bases. We'll just put India to aside for a minute, but you've got China and Russia. And I'm sure, obviously, they're going to be business partners, but there's always a tendency, I mean, it's just human nature to vie for dominance.
And Russia has the resources and China has the people. That's
most definitely. Yeah. But then you, and I agree with you, but I mean, you're then back to this situation with AI that, yes, there's the population there. Yes, there's a military might and all the rest of it. Is it going to matter so much, I wonder, maybe 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 years down the line, that those physical numbers of people with AI and technology? So, yeah, I mean, I can see it being a more resource-based future. And again, let's just chuck Venezuela in for argument's sake. We'll ignore these tankers being seized at the moment by America and their so-called sanctions. We'll not get into that. Whether you agree or disagree, that's just going to be the way it is. So, yeah, Russia have got the resources, and that's it. But at the same token, when we're sort of saying about China and the resources, China have bought up a lot of land, especially in Eastern Europe, interestingly enough, for agricultural land, and we've all got to eat. So, it's I think we're looking at sort of global dominance via not so much maybe sort of military and financial means. It's only an extrapolation of a discussion, but I just think we're probably moving more into a resource-based economy. And not only that, I've got to chuck this in at the same time because it's never included. Technology-based,
Hmm.
and AI based and all the rest of it, because I think technology is going to be the future.
Yeah, well, you have like things like the knowledge economy developing, things like that, and China's
Yeah,
hugely invested into universities.
Elon Musk was talking about this the other day and sort of saying he can see in the future that money as we know it is not going to be either relevant or as relevant as it has been, because it's going to be knowledge and technology based, and maybe that's going to be the new currency where information or speed of information and the ability to adapt is going to be the future. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if it's quite a niche topic. So you have what technocracy is, right? So in the modern day, it's more this idea that you have the people qualified in the job do the job. So you
Yeah.
have doctors.
Yeah.
But in the 1920s, when it got its starting,
Yeah.
they had this idea that you do currency, but so everything is state run.
Yeah.
But you have it like devolves, right? So if America was a technocracy, you'd have Nebraska as its own thing, New York as its own thing, and
Yeah.
they'd run
Yeah.
these states. But the currency would be based on output in proportion to energy. So if you put or it's there'd be things called energy credits. So like a megawatt of energy, a
Yeah.
megawatt hour of energy would be a credit, and then you would earn that through working or whatever, or it'd be paid out as like a universal basic income, and people would go out and spend that energy elsewhere. And then so it would be a devolved system, so states would specialize their
This is
economy.
going to be the way it's going to go.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's got.
But this was in the 1920s. This is what's so shocking.
Yeah, and I
They
think
knew.
I think this is
Sort of.
it's an inevitable evolvement. It cannot go any other way, because otherwise society is just going to collapse. I don't see how it can. You cannot keep sustaining weak or inefficient people or companies or countries it doesn't matter. You just cannot keep sustaining that. So when we're going back to it, let's call it a tech. I'll tell you what. Let's just add to that a technocratic meritocracy.
Yeah.
Whereas, no disrespect to anybody, it sounds really horrible this, but let's say, I don't know, let's pick an example. Let's pick a really crazy example. Let's pick, at the moment, let's say a care assistant. Tend to be relatively low paid, not particularly high on a social structure, as compared to an accountant who's perhaps got a nice position, department head, very well paid, nice car, goes to work in a suit and all the rest of it. Who's more useful? Because I would argue the care assistant is going to be more useful.
Yeah.
With technology that's coming in and AI, that the care assistant is not replaceable. The accountant is. I can get rid of them tomorrow.
In the short term, right? Long term, you have to look at things like robotics and how AI is sort of making robotics more like feasible. So once AI progresses to a point where robotics is now feasible because of AI, then the care worker starts being replaced.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying. In the short term,
yeah. I mean, there's a
be immediate,
cracking
right?
documentary. It's funny you should mention that on Mercedes G wagon. It used to be Puck, and you would think with modern car manufacturing, everything would be welded, automated welding. It's the only part of Mercedes where they're still doing it by hand, because they haven't been, as you just pointed out, they haven't been able yet to automate it, because it's just too awkward, it's too fiddly, and it requires a human hand at the moment. How long that'll go on for, I don't know.
Yeah, like I said, with AI and things.
Yeah, the rest of it. I mean, I don't know if you ever. There was a cracking Open University documentary on Fiat, and reporter goes in, he's doing his bit for the OU, and the guy sort of says, "Oh, come and have a look in the factory." And all you can see is that he's like welding arc flashes, and the whole thing's in darkness. And he sort of says, "Where are the lights?" He says, "Well, we don't need it." He said, "Because everything's automated, they don't need to see." Yeah. There's no point. The only time we have light on,
cost, right?
It's for the maintenance engineers. And I think that sort of brings it home. But then you're sort of looking at what's happened to those workers. They've gone. And then they're sort of employed somewhere else, maybe in the service sector. Is that particularly productive? Not really.
Yeah, because I believe I spoke about this briefly in my hard soft money episode, right? Yeah. A lot of it with automation and things, jobs are becoming more and more menial. And the only reason they exist is because you need that flow of capital to people to then buy the things that are being produced automatically, right?
Right. It's almost like a vicious circle.
Yeah, so going back to sort of the overarching theme with reserve currencies and things,
Yeah.
an output-based system would, with mixed with like a UBI would like automatically, it's not fix that, but it would alleviate that issue by having money as it like pegged to a real tangible thing, while also providing people with money to actually go and spend it, rather than having do these menial, useless jobs.
You've said nothing I disagree with.
Yeah.
Let's just sort of like kind of move on for that. What do you do then with a huge population? Let's ignore countries. I mean, globally.
Yeah.
What do you do with everybody that are not useful?
Yeah, you sort of that's the issue. So I mean, as I said,
they're obsolete.
There's a UBI, right, where you just have people just paying money to exist. But then,
well, is that not the only solution? Can you come up with anything else? Because I can't.
But as I said with in the Hard Money episode, I discussed so Luke Smith shows his idea in the economy is fake, the jobs are fake, but money is fake. And what he says, if we had a true hard money system, where you'd only work 5-10 years, but in that time you'd be extremely high wage with a currency that like causes deflation, right? So it's a currency that accrues value, so like a Bitcoin of sorts, right? Because naturally Earth's output and wealth increases, but the amount of Bitcoin in the system stays the same. So theoretically it'd be a deflationary currency, and what you'd have is this just like 5-year gap where you would earn all of this money and then live off of that for the rest of your life without the need for a basic income, with it still being free market. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's very like because then you have to think, okay, what jobs are going to exist for that proportion of people, right?
Right.
If everything is automated, there's nothing.
Right.
I mean, you can make the argument, those are the people who oversee the technology or the development or things like that. But I mean, even then, that's assuming intelligence itself is not replaced, right? Where you have these super intelligent AI that can just plan infinitely better than a team of humans can. So, like, it's UBI seems to be the only obvious fix.
I agree. I don't see what the solution is, and then what are these people going to do? Because there's got to be a degree of personal fulfillment, and then you sort of link that in maybe with going back to what you just said about this sort of consumerism that hard and soft currencies or cash or remuneration. But what do you do with people because maybe they want to buy, I don't know, a car or whatever? I mean, why do we need 20 or 30 different types of motor vehicle and a new model each year? It's just not necessary. It's certainly not good for the environment. So when we're talking about economics, I don't see how we can look at any single point without linking it to everything else.
Yeah, and then and reversing back again to reserve currencies, you have things like China. So as we were talking about, like an output-based system, you need a country to eventually make that shift to push all the other countries to do that. Obviously, you can't just have like a global, let's all agree, let's have this one universal output-based currency. So obviously, there's the orthodox economics idea, where as a country's exports grows, its currency becomes more valuable, and then as a result, the other currencies become less valuable, which makes their exports. So you have this sort of natural equilibrium of this cycle of countries getting strong and weak currency. But this is what I'm getting to, is that's been broken by China. China has these strong exports, but they aren't getting a strong currency to make other countries' exports equally as strong. And so naturally, we're having to do things like tariffs to counteract that. But then what are tariffs doing? Tariffs are only it's economic self-harm, right? You don't have this natural cycle.
No, because you've not got a free market economy. You've controlled it.
Exactly.
You've got an artificial constraint.
So you don't have this free market foreign exchange where currencies naturally fluctuate in value.
I mean, at the moment,
you also don't like to fix that. You need to do these economically self-harming things, which just doesn't make sense even in the long run because the currency isn't fluctuating in value.
At the moment, China seems to be operating a social market economy, a little bit like Germany did in the 70s with the Wirtschaftswunder, that you've got basically an internal market and an external market, and any goods that were surplus, there's obviously a trade surplus, would be purchased on an internal market, and they offered a tax break to at that time let's say you're in Germany and you're working an Audi or a VW factory, and you needed a washing machine. If you purchased a German washing machine, you get a tax break on your salary at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And so that kind of assisted Germany and German exports in the German economy. Now, I understand we're not permitted to do that under various trade legislation and all the rest of it, because it's unfair. But China's doing it at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing we can really do to stop them, right? You have institutions like the World Bank,
Yeah.
but they sort of just exist. They don't do anything particularly huge.
No, but we're back to this argument then about that basically the whys, the wherefores, and the rights and wrongs. In essence, we've got military dominance and economic dominance. The two are inextricably linked, and somehow this has got to be backed up by tangible resource wealth, whether it's oil, gas, natural materials, rare earths, that sort of thing. Somehow it has to be backed up. Industrial output.
Yeah, we spoke earlier about the petrodollar, right? Which we can get into now. It's sort of dying, right?
It is dying.
Petrodollar. It was. I saw a lot in 2024, but the petrodollar is dead was a huge headline article, and that's because I believe the agreement between the US and Saudi Arabia for Saudi Arabia to exclusively buy in dollars, where it just sort of expired. It was a 50-year agreement.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And now, as a result, Saudi Arabia is buying oil in yuan.
Yeah.
I know Iran has cozied up to the euro and Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So you have these alternative reserve currencies that are also being used. And I don't know if you've looked at the stats of percentage share of reserve currencies. So the biggest loser since 2021, Q3 2021, the US dollar peaked. There was 7.07 trillion reserve dollars in the world economy. Now there's 6.87, I think. These are just rough figures. I know it's decreased in the time. So Q3 2021 was the peak. Now it's decreased. The biggest winners have been the Australian dollar and the Canadian dollar. And that's mostly because the dollar's devaluated, which has naturally made them more valuable. But China, for example, who was also on paper the big winner, has actually seen their reserves also decrease because they've devalued the yuan in relation to the dollar to maintain their dominance. So we spoke about just now that China is dominating the output based on the fact that they're keeping the yuan devalued and they're investing in these things. But I don't think they'll ever become the reserve currency because they're devaluing. So you'll never have a decent enough value to be and a stable enough. I mean, it's a very stable value, but the fact that it doesn't valuate in response to the exports, it's never going to be a reserve currency. It's sort of my argument, right? China will never be a reserve currency.
At the moment, I mean, we've got to look at the situation with Great British Pound, which was kind of like the world's reserve currency. It no longer is. I believe it's in about sixth place or something like that. I don't know without Googling it. Something like about sixth place. So when we're talking about reserve currencies valued by whom and for what purpose? Because I think there's going to be more unanswered questions here. And as a reserve currency in its current form, pegged against what? You've got to have some metric to measure this by.
Yeah, but that's the issue, right? The reserve currency is generally the metric.
Yeah.
So the dollar being the reserve currency means we measure of the world means we measure all worldly values in the dollar, which cements the dollar's place.
Because it's backed up by, at the moment, everything's if let's say oil, gas has to be a dollar transaction. Militarily, they are arguably, I suppose, more militarily sort of capable than any other country. Or were, whether they're going to
China's building
China in there. If you've got a coalition, let's say, I'm not saying this is this case, but just hypothetically speaking, if you got a coalition or an agreement between China, Russia, and India, would they be so powerful? No, they wouldn't. But I mean, this is the argument with NATO, isn't it? At the moment, that if that didn't exist, what happens then? So again, you've got sort of two factors in here: military and economically, which are linked. And going back to economics and reserve currency, let's just deal with this for a second. There's only to take it down to sort of grassroots level. Let's say, it's Friday night, and by Monday morning, you have to produce money. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are, you have to produce money on Monday morning when that alarm clock. You've only got three ways of doing it. You either dig it out of the ground, so you've got oil, coal, gas, I don't know, minerals, rare earths, iron, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You grow it i.e., I don't know, livestock, vegetables, whatever, agriculture, and you export it, or you manufacture something and you export it. After that, there's not really much left that's tangible to earn money. You can manipulate markets, you can manipulate currencies, City of London, all the stock exchanges, or you can invent something. But that's kind of pretty much back to intellectual sort of copyright and
Yeah, well, there's also, of
manufacturing
course, like services, right? That's sort of his other thing. You can offer your labor, but not
you
necessarily offer any capital goods in return for that labor.
Yeah, but that again,
that's sort of his outside of the system.
It is. I mean, it's an interesting one you've picked on there. Let's just look at that, because that's a really interesting thing. Let's just take labour. Generally speaking, I don't. This sounds so deprecatory, and I don't mean it this way. To come out this way, let's say you've got I don't know, a factory worker on a production line. There's no reason why your American factory worker on a production line is capable of anything better than a French worker on a factory production line, or a Russian worker or a Chinese worker. So there has to be something to differentiate. A really good example of this is the Netherlands, and a cracking education system there, loads of great universities, and to partially fund their university costing. I mean, as you're aware, there's a lot of reclaimed land in the Netherlands with Afleidsdijk, Delta Works, and so on and so forth. I mean, they always joke. They also sort of say, you know, God created the earth apart from the Dutch, who had to build the Netherlands themselves. And they export their hydrological engineers to other countries to advise on, obviously flood prevention and land reclamation, so on and so forth. And basically invoice them out to another country, and the funding from that goes back to Dutch universities.
Yeah.
So again, you're still exporting something. So you're back to, I suppose, intellectual worth there. But those are your three main three. Well, we include that last one in manufacturing, because you're producing something, be it intellectual or a tangible thing like an engine block, or I don't know, whatever, or it doesn't matter whether it's an iron body. You're producing something, So there's only three main ways of doing it. I can't think of anything else apart from, like you say, service sector stuff, which. And again, the trouble with that
we had that discussion, right? The service sector stuff is mostly menial jobs that sort of just exist to keep the flow of money in the economy. They could very easily be replaced by, essentially nothing. Right? You could. I mean, it's quite. This sounds quite a controversial thing to say, right? But just fire them all and give them a UBI, and arguably it wouldn't be that much inflation, because
I'm struggling to disagree with you.
Yeah.
I would like to disagree with you, and I can't.
Yeah.
What? And look at the moment, at the situation we're in the minute, with inflation rising. Let's not get into that for the time being. That's a separate issue. What do you do? Keep putting minimum wage up for somebody who's maybe serving coffee in Starbucks or something like that.
Yeah.
It's cheaper, effectively, to do exactly what you've said, to take them out of that job position, give them UBI, and shut the thing down.
Yeah.
Here's a good example. I was working in Lincoln. Somebody I knew there. He was a salesman there. I was kitchen fitting his, by the by. He took another sales position with it's one of these high-end department stores. I can't remember. House of Fraser. And upstairs they've got a furniture department. And his manager said to him, "Look, we're losing money. We've not got the turnover, blah, 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 blah. Has anybody got any solutions?" And this guy quite simply said, he's a very intelligent guy, very, very experienced in retail and the furniture industry, said, "Yeah, shut it down." Because it's cheaper to shut the damn thing down than have stock stood there losing money with no turnover, paying insurance on the building, paying staff costs and everything. Just shut it down.
Yeah, well, also, then you have to also look at how inflated assets have become. So, I talk endlessly about land as a Georgist, but having high land values has made it so barriers to exit are significantly more lucrative than barriers to entry, if you know what I mean. So if you're a company that owns a plot of land, you know,
Right.
this land isn't profitable anymore,
Right.
but land values have gone up this much, we can sell the land, not have to make a loss anymore, and we've made a net profit because we bought this land for 10 grand before 2008,
Yep.
and now it's post 2008, 2025, this land is worth 20 grand, right? You've doubled your
Right.
money. So your barriers to enter to exit are like way more lucrative now than it is to buy a piece of land in a not a failing economy, but in an economy that's certainly slowing down. I see parallels to China in that we've sort of got this stagnation almost. Not quite. We've got the highest growth in the G7 in the I mean, the G7 as a whole can sort of feel this feeling of stagnation that Japan had 20, 30 years ago. So you sort of have this situation where it's like, well, asset prices are so valuable, we might as well sell everything and live off the proceeds and the interest, than actually buy land and try generate new capital. So I think asset inflation has played a huge role in that. And I mean, you look back, and asset inflation has been driven by what? Quantitative easing and a lack of assets, a lack of taxes on assets to devalue it. Things like an annual land value tax, which sort of extract wealth in land, can be reinvested by the government, and obviously reduces the value of land because people don't want to just hold it. It's gone from a boon to a burden.
Right. When we're talking about land,
Hmm.
I'm not trying to be pedantic here. I'm really not, honestly.
Yeah.
What sort?
Just land in general, right? Agricultural land, for example,
Okay,
has
which is cheap.
quadrupled in value though since 2008. Just as an example,
Okay.
it's now £10,000 an acre.
Right.
It used to be £2,500 an acre.
It did. So has the land gone up?
Or has the money in proportion to the amount of land? Yeah.
Right. Or has what you're paying for it with
Yeah.
fallen?
So land is obviously a completely fixed thing, right? There's
Agree.
that joke, but by land they stopped producing it millions of years ago.
Yeah, that was I've forgotten the name of the American author.
Yeah. So obviously there's that old alibi, right? And
Mm.
so land.
Mark Twain.
Yeah. So land by being completely fixed, but money supply essentially increasing infinitely
Right.
is causing
Right.
this massive, and obviously
Right.
the proportion of that infinitely increasing money is obviously continually being filtered into less and less people.
Right.
So on paper, right, people's wages have stayed the same, and we've seen decent wage growth, but the amount of M2 money supply we've seen increase has been astronomical. So where's all that M2 money supply gone? Not in wages, because wages haven't increased like a ridiculous amount as M2.
They have not.
Yeah, M2 money supply has doubled or tripled or something since 2008. Wages have not doubled or tripled. You have to think the proportion of that money being owned by people. I mean, who is it? It's mostly the landowning class and things like that.
Let's assume, and I'm not going to argue with this because I think probably most people would agree that. Let's say gold and or land could be classified reasonably fairly as an asset, and as you say, they're both tangible things. They're both tangible things. So you can't say that lump of soft yellow metal has done anything different. It's just a soft, inanimate object.
And it's scarce.
Land, well, now you're into supply and demand there.
Yeah.
But let's assume
there's no supply of land. Right, that's the issue. Perfectly inelastic.
Yeah. So we've got land again, which is a tangible thing that hasn't done it. It's a bit like food, isn't it? It's like, all right, let's pick a better example: a loaf of bread. That we buy it 1 week and it's, I don't know, £1. You go back 6 months later and it's £4. That loaf of bread's still a loaf of bread, but it hasn't increased in value. Its tangible value, its intrinsic value is exactly the same. So what's actually happened is what you're paying for it has decreased. Good example, Russia. Great podcast recently, Russian lady, living in Moscow with her mum and dad. And she says, just put it out there, gas bill. There's mum's traditional, she stops at home, got the heating on pretty much all the time, cooks every meal for dad, dad works in a factory. She says, have a guess in US dollars what the gas bill is for the month. All these figures coming in. It comes out in US dollars about $2 a month for the gas bill. Recent criticism in the UK press saying, Russians are sort of, so downtrodden, they're so badly paid. Average, a good monthly salary would be something like 800, the equivalent in sterling, 800 quid a month.
Yeah.
Fine. Nobody's going to disagree with that. But that 800 quid will cover rent for a flat, run a car, 2 holidays a year, be able to go out and clothe yourself. So it's all relative. So when we're going into values, it's all right sort of saying it's only 800, it's only 800 quid in sterling. But what can you buy for that in Russia or in China or in the United Arab Emirates?
That's where you get things like purchasing power parity. And
Right.
stuff like that.
So, and we always have a gauge here, don't we? A metric where we're talking about GDP, but very, very rarely do we hear about purchase power parity.
See, I mean, this is my issue with it, right? Is that purchasing power parity you see, and it's like, oh, China by purchasing power parity is bigger than the US, and I don't disagree with that. But then if you take, obviously, even adjusted for per capita, if you take the average person from China and they go to the US, they're not going to have the same purchasing power because the yuan is so incredibly devalued.
Yeah.
So while purchasing power parity, right, the average person in China may be able to buy more than the average person in the US on comparable wages.
Yeah.
If you then obviously adjust the wage to the actual country, right? If you take someone from the US with their dollar income and drop them in China, their purchasing power parity is astronomically huge.
Yeah.
And that's I call it the purchasing power parity. I call it the please pretend we aren't poor index, because I mean obviously right. I mean these countries look vastly wealthy, but the moment you place the average income earner in that country to one of the high GDP countries, they're completely out of their depth and are entirely broke, and that's the issue with it. Is that it's representative of the individual economy, but in a globalistic economy that we live in, GDP is arguably superior in that respect because it's in actual real dollar terms.
So let's just go back.
Although I do have criticisms of GDP, it's not based on output. It's
I don't think it's an accurate measure, but I'm the same as you. I have criticism with it as well. Let's just go back to individuals then. So with what we've just discussed. So let's say you've got an American factory worker producing whatever they produce. I don't know. It doesn't matter. A chair. Okay. And he's paid X number of dollars per hour. His salary is whatever per month, whatever. And it purchases whatever it does in the States. And because at the moment, because of dollar hegemony, it's effectively worth more. Let's just use the yuan as you mentioned it. And it's equivalent in China. That effectively, if you got your Chinese worker went over to the States, he would be worth less. We're paying for US goods or US services with the yuan. If you've got the equivalent worker in the States goes over to China, he's doing exactly the same job, pushing exactly the same thing. He's going to be worth more.
Yeah.
Through PPP. However, what happens when we've got true globalization?
You'd have like a unified currency, right? So theoretically, PPP would be useless.
Right.
GDP.
Right.
But then you need a global currency.
Well, do you need a global currency or do you need something to back it by?
You had backing it by, you'd have like the gold standard or I don't know how well read you're on Key.
You can't do that. You can't back stuff with the gold standard. I personally, I would back it by the gold standard, but I don't think you can anymore.
That's what I was getting into, right? So you had this like idea by Keynes, the Bancor, right? Are you familiar with the Bancor?
Yeah, I did research that. Yeah.
So that was an idea by Keynes that would theoretically equalize the global economy and have this sort of this global reserve currency, which wasn't any individual country's currency.
Yeah.
So it'd be like an IMF sort of controlled currency, which people would exchange for their own currency.
Can I just stop you there? Because I've just got to ask you something on that. Let's say the IMF just arguably produced a global reserve currency, and I love the idea of that, by the way.
Or a UN dollar. Or
whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter whether you call it the Easter egg currency, whatever. You pick something. How are you going to get agreement on that?
I mean, that's the other thing you can't, right? So you have China with a massive trade surplus, which isn't even necessarily benefiting them, right? It's giving them a lot of dollars to throw around and a lot of euros and such to throw around, but it isn't valuating their currency. So it's like, I mean, they can spend a hell of a lot on imports, but then that offsets their exports, so they can't keep boasting a huge surplus, right?
But you would have to get
China wouldn't accept it because they don't really benefit. They don't benefit
no,
currently.
and that's it. They've got to take care of their national interests. So you'd have to get sort of consensual agreement across every planet, every country on the planet to go for this. And I don't think it's unachievable, by the way. I'm not arguing against it or for it. I'm just, trying to toss this around because I tend to think you're probably right that, and it has been mooted that we need a one world government, a one world currency, and a one world set of laws. How you go about achieving that, I've no idea. But I don't think, and
we had the UN at the end of World War II, right?
Yeah.
But how did we get to the UN? World War II.
Right, and we're back to military means and discord. Let's not get into the rights and wrongs of that because Germany will argue maybe that they were right, Russia will argue that they were right, we'll argue that we were right, and then round and round it goes.
Yeah.
So we can sit here, and I don't mind debating, and I don't mind discussing it. I like it, I enjoy it. But at the end of the day, you've got to put food on the table. I mean, you've got to get, I'm sure you're aware, you know this, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've heard about it, you know about it. You've got to put a roof over your head. You've got to put clothes on your back, and you've got to eat, basically. Anything else, we're going up that sort of pyramid of, education, so on and so forth. So, somehow, and we've got to take care of ourselves as individuals. And I'm not any massive proponent of Thatcher or anything else, but she did sort of say, society as we know it is finished. And maybe it is, but and I'm not in a bad way. Maybe we're going to be looking at a global society. Is that possible? I don't know. Pause it for a minute. Let's have a bit. Going back to the bit about the states. Right. And is it homogenised? I'm not entirely sure that it is. The only reason I say that, or would question that,
I'd say it's not homogenised, but multicultural. And then as a result of being so multicultural, it's almost homogenized. And they have these shared figures. They have this shared pop culture, which I believe is a big part of homogenization. Homogenization isn't necessarily everyone's roughly got these same ideas. There's a lot of polarization.
Yes,
but it's all the same figures.
I think my point. Somebody put across. I can't remember which president said it, but they sort of said, "Look, you can move to Germany as an immigrant, but you will never be a German. You can move to Spain, but you'll never be, a Spaniard. Anybody from anywhere in the world can move to America, and there will be an American.
Yeah.
So I don't know about homogenization, but I'm going to pinpoint this, and again, probably I'm being sort of pedantic about this and argumentative, but I would sort of say they have if not homogenization, have a strong sense of national identity.
Yeah.
That there's a collective thought process whereby whether you're European, whether you're Spanish, whether you're from the Indian subcontinent, whether you're Asian, whatever, at the end of the day, you're now American.
You could also make the argument that's America's overwhelming soft power. They dominate the film industry with Hollywood.
They do.
They dominate the TV industries with Disney and Warner Brothers and the likes.
Absolutely.
Literally, as I just said with Looney Tunes, right? Since the 1940s, they've had this complete preeminent presence in the global film industry. Right?
Yeah.
Every film you watch is made in Hollywood.
It's so true. It's so true.
That's sort of the other thing, right?
Yeah.
You grow up with American media, you can very easily fit into the American.
I've got to just chuck this one in, edit it out, or put it in somewhere else. But it was God, I forgot his damn name now. It'll come back to me. I always forget this chap's name. And he said, America has no permanent friends or enemies.
That has Henry
Kissinger. It was Kissinger, thank you. Only interests. And I sometimes wonder, I sort of think, now is America a country or a corporation?
Yeah.
And, it just kind of, it raised a lot of questions. But going back to this homogenization bit, I've sort of I've meandered off the track here a bit, let's go back to the stock exchanges there. And, world commodities market, arguably more relevant than
commodities. London is uniquely punching above its weight on that. Right, you have the industrial metals exchange, which is in London. It uses the dollar.
Baltic Dry Index as well.
You see,
I would argue that's even more important. But anyway,
but that's the other thing, right? This is what
I'm
just adding this in.
Go on.
Right, so you have these exchanges based in London, the Baltic one, etc. but they use the dollar, right? So even these like rare instances where it's
Yeah.
finally it's not the US, they
Yeah,
still
yeah.
use the US dollar.
It's
So
still a
just
top.
sort of to emphasize, how dominant the dollar is,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely,
So
yeah.
To say it's still not an extremely strong reserve currency, even if on paper, right, it's gone from 56% to 53% of all global reserves. So it's fallen, but its dominance is still.
We'll move on to housing estates and land in a bit, if I can remember, on another episode of something or other.
Okay.
Right, let's just go back to this business of that you raised about national, well, cohesion, if you like. There's stock exchange. There are 20 stock exchanges in America. I didn't realise how many there were.
Yeah,
there are 20. And then we were talking about the power of the London Stock Exchange. I'm just going to jump into that real quick and then disappear again on that one. But I've got the figures written down there somewhere. I can't bother to look it up. They always sort of say, I'm not going to get into the pro or anti-Brexit thing at the moment because, to be honest with you, it's boring. I'm actually anti-Brexit. I think we ought to be in Europe. But anyway, we'll discuss that another time.
Yeah.
But the prep, and I'm very, very right wing. If anything, I'm not at all left wing. If anything, I'm far too far to the right.
Yeah.
But I'm pro Europe.
Yeah.
Which nobody seems to say. Oh, you can't say that. Yeah, I can say that because business wise, we're losing about 90 billion a year at the moment being out of the EU.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But business wise, to me, it just makes sense to be in. I'm not going to get into the politics or anything else.
You can tie this into this episode with, if we rejoined the EU, would we adopt the euro? And if we adopted the euro, what would the implications?
Save that for another one. I don't want to get into it. Save that for another one because we're going down another road.
Some interesting food for thought.
It is. But the point I was going to, or the comment I was going to make is that the press, especially the right wing press, and as I said, I'm not left wing, especially the right wing press, I said, thank God we're out of Europe. The London Stock Exchange, biggest in the world, it does so much. I'm not going to swear because you'll have to edit that out. I don't consider that a valid point. And there's a reason being, and they always compare it to German Stock Exchange, and you say, which one? They've got 8. Which stock exchange are you talking about in Germany?
Usually the DAX, right?
Right. Well, that's just the Deutsche Aktien Index, which runs on Xetra, which is a trading platform that the other exchanges use. So we need to ask, which stock exchange are you talking about? Bearing in mind, Germany is not exactly, very similar to Russia, very similar to America, it's a collective country. It's a federation. And everybody forgets this, including the financial and the laws are very, very different in the Hanseatic states. But they also kind of tend to include Bavaria and Austria with that. And obviously there's an influence from Switzerland. So when we're sort of saying in the right-wing press, and I say I'm certainly not left-wing, that, London's got market dominance. Has it? Especially when you look at a collective number of stock exchanges, we start including, the Parisian Stock Exchange and all the rest of it. And let's look at where the money's gone. The money's gone to Dublin. It's gone to the Netherlands. It's gone to Paris. So we're losing a lot. Yeah, we've got market dominance-ish at the moment, but companies are delisting.
Of, value, but then you have to look at potential growth and room to increase output, and also flows of money. Right, leaving the EU meant that flows of capital into the UK from the EU was significantly diminished. So being the dominant stock exchange, but then leaving a market which provided a ridiculous amount of capital to maintain your dominance was an incredibly impressive act of self-sabotage, right? I mean, you couldn't imagine a worse way to reduce.
Yeah, but we're having a conversation whether I agree with you and you agree with me. We need to find something that we can disagree on. Really,
point.
It is. Yeah, and the trouble is we're agreeing on too much, and we tried to find something to disagree on. Oh, and a lot of business went over to New York.
Why
don't
we move to CBDCs then? Because I have some interest.
Central bank digital currency.
Yes. My impression was you were relatively negative about that, and sort of saw it as a bit.
I'm not necessarily negative about it. The issue I've got with CBDC is who measures it, who values it, and who implements it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, right.
the central traditionally it would be like the Bank of England or
Let's take a practical example, something that some dimwit like me can understand, right? Because I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack. Let's say I've got 500 quid in my wallet, okay, and I pick a note out, a 20 quid note out. All it says on it is, I promise to pay the bearer on demand. There is no intrinsic value to that, as you're fully aware.
Yeah.
It is a promissory note, backed up theoretically by industrial output,
of the demand for it,
natural resources, blah de blah de blah de blah de blah.
Yeah.
Right. So if we move over to, let's say, CBDC, I don't see it's going to make any difference. So I'm not actually anti-CBDC. The problem I've got with it is twofold. I tell you what, it's twofold. It is honestly that it is one little word on the end of it that concerns me. Is programmable. Right. CBDC programmable. Because at the end of the day, let's say I've worked my butt off and I've decided I'm going to go on a holiday to Mauritius and I'm going to buy a turbocharged V8 diesel Land Rover.
Right.
And under carbon trading tariffs, which I think are going to be individually designated, I hasten to add, whoever's running the show, presumably the investment companies, the central banks, so on and so forth, look at this and sort of say, you can go on holiday to Mauritius and you can sit on that beach, but you're not buying that car because your carbon trading tariffs have gone up through the roof, or we're going to take that money off you because you've exceeded it. So and this is already happening in China. This is you know,
capital controls are huge.
Exactly. So
I mean, they have all these billionaires, but then the billionaires suddenly leave and they aren't billionaires anymore.
Right.
So
yeah. So that's the issue I've got with it, and then so it's fine provided you've got you know, a system whereby it's not going to penalise you, or I'm going to have to put this in very basic terms, from working hard, being diligent, because otherwise you're just right down to socialism and bordering on communism. Because if I work harder than everybody else, why should I not receive more?
Yeah.
You know, and this goes back down to your point of universal basic income. If I've got greater skills than somebody that's working in a coffee shop, why should I not be rewarded for that? And who's to tell me how I can, when, and where I should spend the money I've earned, all the credits that I've earned? So we're in an absolute sort of maelstrom of not just economic arguments here.
I think when wealth gets
but also moral.
I mean, like, any wealth over $1 billion is such an unimaginable amount that having credit controls on billionaires. I don't know. I think I agree with your point in that there should be a free market and you should be rewarded for it if you did work hard and increased output a lot, and you should get capital from that. But like, I don't necessarily think, you know, when it gets to such a scale, right, that you you for sure have, you know, messed up somebody else or ruined somebody else's life to get that unimaginable.
That's exploitation.
That's exploitation, right? And anything over £1 billion is almost guaranteed in my mind, and also having that much wealth concentrated in a single person is
to get $1 million, whatever. You've exploited somebody somewhere.
Yeah, so I think capital. I mean, I sort of disagree with that. We shouldn't have any capital controls. I mean, I don't think that's what you were getting at. But no. You were certainly a lot more pro individual wealth than I would be. I'm not anti-individual wealth, but when it gets to, like, as I said, to such a scale is
yeah, I agree. I tend to agree with you on this. I mean, I expect to disagree with you, and I don't really.
Yeah.
Much as I would like to disagree, I can't, because how much do you actually need as an individual?
Not much.
No, and we're back down to individual needs then, aren't we? And choices that.
I mean, relatively. So when I say not much, I mean relatively quite a lot for the average person, right? With house prices as they are, and the likes, and like, I mean, you said earlier about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Yeah.
Housing is literally one of the basic needs, and when housing is one of the most expensive things you'll probably ever buy in your entire life, probably the most expensive thing. I mean, it's questionable, right?
But why is it?
Because I mean,
why is it
a lack
so
of supply, and then there's also like a huge excess of demand because of all the wealth throwing around and things like that. And quantitative easing. Obviously, land values have massively inflated as well. On top of that, you have to think.
Do you think that's true?
Land values are huge.
Well, let's stop. Let's stop at that point.
I know. Hang on, I have some figures.
Go on.
I know one, for example, in some cities in the
Go on.
UK, 60% of the price of a house is the land.
Right.
In some places.
I mean,
that's insane.
I've got a reasonable sort of knowledge of the building trade because I've been in it 40 years construction. Let's just take that. Let's say, let's take. I tell you what. Let's either take the UK or the Netherlands or Canada. Right. Tell you what. Let's take those three because they're interesting because we're going to have a juxtaposition with those. The UK and the Netherlands, very, very similar. You've got relatively small geographical areas, as you're aware. Well, not relative, quite high population densities, especially in the Netherlands. So, house prices, again, back to your basic supply and demand, you've got large populations, small land mass. Well, it's going to go up. It's going to go up. Why then, if you've got a situation like Canada, where we've got a massive, massive sort of land mass, which is very sparsely populated, is it so expensive? And the answer to that, it's not. It's expensive in certain urban conurbations. Let's take Portugal. Let's say you're in an urban area in Portugal. It's expensive. Let's look at Paris. It's expensive. Let's take some back and beyond, out in the sticks area in northern France. It's cheap as chips. Let's take, I don't know, somewhere in the Republic of Ireland. I don't know, County Sligo. They virtually pay you to go there. Yeah. So, because there's no work. So your economics argument is basically ratified in a way that it's supply and demand. That if nobody's going to go to County Sligo to make a million quid and be driving a Maserati and have a swimming pool in the backyard next week. That's not going to happen. You're going to go to New York. But New York's expensive. I mean, it's stupid money. Mumbai's more expensive, incidentally. Just an interesting. Yeah, here we go. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So it depends.
Well, Mumbai is like an extreme example of lack of supply, right?
Right.
It was literally just a small archipelago of 7 islands that they filled in and made as a peninsula.
Yeah.
It's entirely artificial land. And is very scarce because it's artificial.
Yeah.
Land.
Next time we get into a conversation with this, we need to get into the UK housing market and housing estates. Yeah. Because that's fascinating.
But just hang on, just to comment on Canada. You use Canada as an example of all of its urban population, and it's a huge landmass, and as a result, they reckon that of all the value in Canada, of all the land value in Canada, it's about 6.4 trillion, which is more than the UK is, I think, a bit more than that, but it's close to the UK in total land value.
Yeah.
But they only have half the population.
Yeah.
But obviously a lot more land. So I don't think it's necessarily simply a supply and demand issue. I think Canada's also just hugely speculated upon, right? You have these huge oil companies owning ridiculous amounts of land in Alberta. You do have this big urban population, but you have property values in the millions, right? On average, in the millions, which is insane. Obviously in Canadian dollars, so it's not valued too much. I think it's 2 point something Canadian dollars.
But you're still in the same position where Canadian residents can't afford to own property.
Yes, and I think that is mostly land values being inflated by speculation. Because when you have that much land, and you have these economic agents who very clearly benefit from the speculation.
They do.
Take the oil barons, take the timber industry, etc. in Canada, who obviously have a huge amount of capital and have a reason to want to speculate on land that does generally increase in value because of the taxes on it. You can just hold land infinitely, do nothing with it, and still benefit because the economy naturally progresses. So not paying a tax on that, in my mind, makes no sense. And the fact that they own these vast swaths of land creates that value, right? It creates this artificial demand which other people see and then fill in, right? It's almost like a crypto pump and dump scheme, right? You have this one creator who holds the coin, gives it some value. You have 10,000, 20,000 fans come in, buy up the coin, pump the value, and the guy can sell it. And have all that capital. Land is almost the same in that, like, as I said, you have these rich economic agents who buy it, create that demand. Other smaller scale, even say investment bankers, right? They'll come in, also buy the land, and it creates this bubble. But the bubble never bursts because, I mean, land is land, right? Unless it's like a housing supply situation where you need to buy the land to build the house. But housing is obviously such a crucial thing that demand is so inelastic that anyone will buy it, right? You have this situation where it's almost like an infinite bubble that needs fiscal control, fiscal policy to control it, right? With, as I say, a land value tax, you have to continually pay tax on the land. You can't just hold it infinitely, creating this infinite demand.
Let's just take this down to brass tacks, something that I can understand. Let's talk about land value.
Okay.
If I wanted to buy land in central London and build a house, it would be reasonably arguable that it was beyond most people's economic means. But let's say you've got a normal job in Birmingham, just pick one, I don't know, in a shop or a factory, but I want to move to central London and live there. That's not going to happen. That's la la land. That just ain't going to happen. If, let's say, I go to Galicia or something like that, rural Spain, middle of nowhere, and I want some log cabin type thing, the land is very, very cheap and all the rest of it. So I can get on the housing ladder, just not where I want. So when we're talking about land value and property value, who's going to build this thing? That has to be paid for. So you've got to pay for labour. Secondly, you've got to pay for somebody to act for the materials.
That's capital.
Right. So somebody has got. You've got to pay somebody to build the thing. You've got to pay for the bricks and everything else and the roof and da 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 da. So they won't pay it.
You need to pay for the land, right? That's what Henry George's a famous distinction between land and capital. Land, labour, capital. It's not so land. So this is a common neoliberal failure where they conflate capital or land with capital. Land and capital are two very separate things. Neoliberals have a failure of saying, "Oh, capital and land is a form of capital." It's sort of where I'm coming from, right? That's one of my big distinctions in economics in general, right? If a lot of people just conflate those two issues, so they simply cannot understand why a land value tax is effective.
Okay, let's just get back to that because I'm not clear on that.
Right.
Help me out with that one.
How do you not see land as being different? How do you see land as being a form of capital?
Because I think, right, let's say you've got £50,000 in your bank account. And I've got, let's say, 6 acres. Okay. We can either look at it in terms of agricultural production, because you need to eat.
That's okay. So when you see land, you see the potential to use the land to produce something.
Not necessarily.
Okay, but like just as the farming example, right?
Go on.
So farming, the produce of the farm would be the capital, right?
No, not necessarily. I'm just as an example.
Okay, yeah.
You know, but it's a fixed asset, right? And I can produce something from it that you need, or you could build on it. Okay, so it's something that can be capitalised on. I'm going to get 6 units per acre.
You can capitalise on land, but that doesn't mean land is capital. So capital is something.
It's equity.
Sure, yeah, it's equity.
It's equity.
So, but it's not capital. Land is not capital.
Equity can be converted to capital because you're borrowing it.
Yeah, but so you can borrow money to buy land, right? But that doesn't make land capital, because capital. If you buy a factory, right, that is capital, and that's producing more output to then produce more capital. Okay. You can build another factory. You cannot build another land.
No, I can't. So what happens about...
So capital is generative, whereas land is completely fixed, right? I mean, even the ocean has land, and at the bottom of the ocean, that land has value.
Absolutely,
because there's rare earth metals on it.
Fish that we eat.
Exactly. So you can still have a land all land has value. I mean, it's just relative to what's on that land and what's in the land. That gives it
it's equity, which is borrowed against.
But unlike capital, where the capital is not already pre-established, the capital has to be generated. But once you generate that capital, you can invest in more capital and generate more and more and more.
But you have land. You have an intrinsic land value with land, though, don't you?
Exactly. So as I said, you have to generate capital to create the value. Land, it's just pre-existing.
I see. I see what you're saying. So if you just left it,
it would still exist and
It
have
would
that
still
value.
exist, but you don't
Whereas
regard that as
capital, you
capital.
have to put back,
Okay. I
you
see
have
where
those
you're coming from.
inputs,
All right,
and
yeah,
that's why
okay.
land is different from capital.
It is. It's there. I tell you what, it's almost like having an asset that you're not capitalising on.
Yeah,
But it's there.
and you don't need to capitalise on it, and it still accrues value
It does,
because
yeah.
there's no tax to pay on it.
Yeah.
You can just hold it,
Yeah.
and that's what the tax is about. As I keep reiterating,
Okay,
the
that's
tax turns
fine.
it from a boon to a burden. So
Yeah.
the boon is obviously you just sit on it and it accrues value almost guaranteed.
So as an
because
individual,
naturally
what would
it's
you
increased in
rather
demand,
have?
right?
Would you rather have a factory that's producing something on land?
Of course, I'd prefer to have a factory on the land to produce output for a better economic. Obviously, depending on the type of factory, right? You'd want like a carbon neutral factory with that
Okay.
limits externalities, but a factory is a factory at the end of the day, and a land doing, assuming it's completely blank land, right? There's no grass on it or trees or anything that would act as like carbon stores, which would obviously have
But you
some
monetize
economic
that.
benefit. You could monetize
You
that.
just
I suppose, with
monetize that
carbon
by saying
credits.
carbon stores.
Yeah, you could make it obviously a carbon credit tax break thing. But obviously, just holding the land itself and not actually monetizing it doesn't do anything for the economy. And even obviously having that green land,
It doesn't. I'm going to stop there.
yeah, and having that green
Go
land
on.
doesn't also necessarily provide anything to the economy. That would
It
exist
doesn't.
no matter what.
It doesn't.
And that's why you need things like green fields and public lands, right?
Yeah.
But the government doesn't have that.
No.
And land value taxes, by inflating the value of land, limits the government ability to have that also. So that's why a land value tax could come in, and we could still have these greenfield things, but you could also have the land value tax spurring brownfield development, which is a big issue in there's a lot of derelict lands.
At what point do you sort of say that quality of life surpasses monetary value?
What do you mean? Like,
well, let's say you've got a piece of land
Mm.
and there's no factory on it,
yeah,
no business on it, but you've got trees on it and you've got wildlife on it, and it's nature rich.
yeah. So at what stage of development does the quality of life provided by that land outcompete the? I don't know. I mean, obviously that piece of land. I mean, obviously it's in relation to other pieces of land. If that's the only piece of land at all, then obviously you're gonna want to develop it for some.
So you're back to
settlements
supply and demand.
things. Yeah, but if there's obviously various more acres of land around that could also be for development without impeding on that like greenery and an environment.
But that's dictated by population.
Obviously, yeah, so obviously there's a lot of factors to consider.
So if
But
I'm out
there's
in the middle of
also
nowhere,
equally so, there's a lot of land to use and to consider. I mean, I talk about land being fixed, but there's still a hell of a lot of land to use. So, like, I mean, you look at like the Highlands of Scotland. There's a lot of just greenfield there that could be developed. I don't know how sustainable that development would be.
you can't really grow anything on it.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't
happen.
use it as agriculture. You'd have
No.
to use it for some industrial
And
means.
you can't build on it
And
because
obviously
it's going to cost you too much.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, exactly, because of high land values.
Well,
So-
you can't build on it because it's going to cost you too much because of the topography of the land. Let's say
Yeah,
you've got
but obviously there's a geographical aspect of it also, but there is like flat aspects, flat areas of the highlands that, for example, we could use for wind farms. But then you have to get into the social issue of building the pylons for those wind farms.
those wind farms
through
don't
rural-
pay, do they?
No, not necessarily. You need like batteries and things to maintain
That,
the
that's
base load.
pay. I mean, they're not even UK manufactured. I mean, look at the oil that's required to build those things. There's so many sort of 1,000 tons of cubic meters of concrete going there. The thing's got a 15 to 20 year lifespan anyway. The carbon footprint carbon footprint on those things is astronomical. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, I don't know. I'm certainly a proponent for green energy. I think solar panels are certainly leading the charge right now.
so am I. But if it worked, the oil companies would be out of business.
But oil companies have such a vast amount of wealth though to put into things like, I mean, also
If it made money, they'd be doing it.
Yeah, but you have to think, Ren, why are oil companies moving towards things like hydrogen and nuclear, and also with the amount of wealth that oil companies have,
Marrying King Hubbard.
yeah, but they can they have so much wealth that they can put it in the pockets of politicians to maintain the oil companies, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you also look at countries like Saudi Arabia. Why are they divesting into solar energy and desalination plants and things like this?
Well, because we're running out of oil.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So the oil companies certainly see renewables
They're just going to
as
move
a
it
threat.
on. It's like the tobacco industry. They start banning not banning cigarettes. They tax cigarettes out of existence. Where do they move? Vaping,
Yeah.
which actually earned more money.
Which, well, we're taxing that now. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's still earning more money.
Yeah.
Tax? No, people don't pay tax at that level. They don't pay tax. That's offshore. Nobody pays.
Yeah. I don't know.
Look at McDonald's and people like that. They don't pay tax like that. You know, Amazon, they don't pay tax.
No. Well, that's the other thing with the I mean, just in general, the fiscal issue has a lot of, but the fiscal policy as a whole seems deeply flawed, right? It seems to promote monopolization.
Yes, it does.
And it seems to, generally it incentivizes business activity, but only at the very, very, very high end, and it disincentivizes business industry at like the low local end, right? And that's the issue. Even though on paper, right, our corporation tax is progressive, and so bigger companies generally should pay a higher corporation tax. But it very, very rarely is the actual reality of it.
But you know as well as I do that in a global economy, that politicians run nothing, governments run nothing. We'll just move it. If you don't like my listen, here's one for you then. Let's take Nissan in Sunderland. Good example, right? If I don't get what I want, if I don't get those tax breaks, I'll just shut it down and put 30,000 UK workers on the dole. Now, either give me the tax break I want, or I'm going to move it. What are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. When you have like business so concentrated in like,
what are you going to do? You've got no choice. You're going to toe the line.
Yeah, you're around.
It doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree. That's the way that's going to roll.
It's very much the same with like the concentration of wealth in general, right? Not just amongst corporations. You have these people who are so wealthy that they can just do like whatever they want, and because the wealth is all concentrated into them, they are sort of they like leverage their influence over the economy amongst everyone else's influence over the economy, and use that to get what they want.
Certainly politically.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, that's the thing, right? With economics, you always have to
So what
consider the other aspects.
What price democracy then? Is there really anything to do with democracy?
Yeah, you need to get money out of politics to make democracy.
So when we
vote,
does it make any difference?
Not really, not right now with money in politics.